Hi, my name is Josh Green. I'm the photo archivist and media unit manager at the Provincial Archives in New Brunswick. My little presentation I put together today is called Introduction to Photographs of the Provincial Archives and Moncton Show and Tell. So I want to start by talking a little bit about the archives itself. We've been around for just over 50 years and we've been collecting photographs the entire time. So we have somewhere between 500,000 and 600,000 photographs, just over 560,000 individual images. So the time period span there is from right back to almost the invention of commercial photography just after 1839. So certainly by the early 1840s, we've got images from that early, mostly portraits, going all the way up to the present day and covering all major formats at that time and every kind of subject you can imagine, from portraiture to landscapes and to everything in between. And I think I'll also mention here that we not only have photographs, but we have other types of images at the archives as well that people might not be aware of. So before we move on to talking about Moncton, I'll mention that as well. We have a great deal of documentary art and other types of artistic representations of the province, whether they be prints, sketches, paintings, and so on, including one or two pieces of art that go right back to the mid-18th century, showing New Brunswick before it even existed as a province of New Brunswick, established in 1784. Most of those, the oldest images, are during the 7 Years' War, when the contest between British and French over who was to control the future nation of Canada was still on. So this one here that I'm showing, this is a circa 1768 engraving of a scene that actually took place in the 1750s. We actually have this piece. It's huge. It's a few feet across. And it is an engraving entitled "A View of the Miramichi, a French settlement in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, destroyed by Brigadier Murray, detached by General Wolfe for that purpose from the Bay of Gaspé." So there's just a few detailed shots of that, just to kind of show some of the old and very interesting art that we have. The community of Burnt Church received its name from this raid after the British burned the church there. And here's a view of the landing party. And just because we're talking about old art and 7 Years' War and art in the archives, here's a little painting of Robert Moncton, the city's namesake. Moncton was responsible for the vigorous prosecution of orders to destroy Acadian settlements in New Brunswick. It's a shame, but we really don't have a great deal of very old 19th century photographs of Moncton, nor do we have much for old art. We have a good deal of 19th century art depicting New Brunswick, just not your part of New Brunswick necessarily. But a lot of this art, few folks are aware that it even exists. So this is an 1834 lithograph of downtown Fredericton, based on an old sketch. And you can see some Wolastoqey Maliseet people on the bottom right. That we also have this beautiful 1830 sketch. This is just a sampling out of, what might be hundreds of pieces of art that are floating around the archives. This is a lovely, extremely detailed view of summer camp of the Maliseet Wolastoqey people just across from Fredericton. And it's hard to make out here, but in the background is Old Government House and other old sketches and watercolor arts. This is the British Boundary Commission Depot, who these folks were surveying the line between New Brunswick and Maine. So we don't have a lot of 19th century photographs of Moncton, but we do have a lot of 20th century photos. And almost, fortunately though, we do have these two lovely so-called bird's eye views of Moncton, which a lot of people have seen. We have an 1881 print and an 1888 version. Here's the 81 presented by the Moncton Sugar Refining Co. And these are very detailed. The principal buildings are fairly accurately represented. As you can see here in this little zoom in of Botsford, Victoria, Wesley Street, Alma. Another detail from the 1881 view, around the edges, they have these nice close-up drawings, renderings of buildings, important establishments and residences. This shows H.T. Stevens' residence and office in 1881. It was, I think, It was a printing office, and they're advertising, publishing, and bookbinding on the side. Here's the 1888 bird's eye view, which might be a bit better known, and it was sold commercially, I think, a few times in the 20th century. Detail of that showing Main Street. All those numbers are individual buildings that are represented at the bottom. You can go and look them up and see what they were. A view of general offices, shops, and station of the Intercolonial Railway. In terms of photographs, our Moncton material really doesn't begin until perhaps as late as the 1880s. And then most of it is even clustered closer to about 1890. So I thought we'd start with a selection of these, and many of them come from the album of the Intercolonial Railway. They come from the album of an amateur photographer who was an employee of the ICR in Moncton in the 1890s. This one's just labeled Central Schoolhouse, Moncton, New Brunswick, 1891. And I should take just a second to explain why they're blue. This amateur photographer was using a kind of, in New Brunswick, rare and unusual printing process to produce photographs called cyanotypes. It's fairly easy to do, and the materials might not have, didn't perhaps require as much chemical expertise as some of the other printing processes, so it might have appealed to an amateur. So this is quite a neat little album, and we'll look at some stuff from that. This man's album does provide an interesting and rare insight into middle-class life and leisure in Moncton in the 1890s. He photographed his friends and colleagues, like Mr. G. Ackman here, chief of the fire department in 1892. This one reminds me of Van Gogh's portrait of his friend, the postman Joseph Roulin, which was done in 1888, only 4 years before our Moncton fire chief. The resemblance is pretty uncanny in their uniforms and everything, even their postures a bit. And here's Ackman with his family outside of his house somewhere in Moncton, and all from this album. Here are Miss Archibald and Miss Sumner, somewhere in Moncton in 1892, perhaps in the ICR offices. The kimonos and Japanese attire can be partly explained by the fact that from the 1860s onwards, with the opening up of Japan to the West, many Westerners, particularly in the upper and middle classes, became fascinated with Japanese culture and collected Japanese objects, like this family and these girls in Moncton. For example, on the left is the 1872 painting by Alfred Stevens called La Parisienne Japonaise, and just to the right of it is Claude Monet's Madame Monet en costume japonais, and at the far right is George Breitner's 1894 girl wearing a kimono, which is almost contemporary with the Moncton girls. And along the same lines, I stumbled across this great photo the other day of a New Brunswicker called Philippe Arsenault reading a book called Jiu-Jitsu Tricks in about 1920. So the fascination with Japan went on in New Brunswick, especially after the turn of the century. Some of these old Moncton shots we really can make little sense of. We don't know much about them. They were hardly annotated, some of them. Here are soldiers of some sort marching across train tracks, presumably in Moncton about 1892, but I can't tell you anything else about it really. It's quite interesting. Other photos in this album are superb documents of everyday life, like the shot of the boys of the Moncton Fire Department, number 3 Hose Company in 1891, with their great uniforms and everything. We can zoom in here. The close-up of the Hose Company with the barely visible Fire Queen in the background. You can see the little girl with the crown on, just barely, perhaps on a parade float. It looks like she's got a built-in parasol above her. The person who created this album in Moncton even did some early action news type reporting, showing that in this case, the 19th September 1896 destruction of the Moncton sugar refinery by fire. The same people who produced that print we were looking at earlier. The creator of the album did go elsewhere in New Brunswick taking photos, and including like the superb one of the imposing old St. John ICR station house. Beware of the train. Good advice. There are lots of great early 1890s shots of the ICR complex, in particular in Moncton. This one showing, for instance, the shop and store office building and some employees outside and machinery. And a beautiful overview of Moncton Station in 1891. And here's a zoom in close up of that. You can see the Moncton sign, ladies and gents standing around waiting for the train. And this great shot of the sturdy old ICR General Offices building in Moncton about the same time. We also recently acquired a small but lovely series of circa late 1880s to mid 1890s photos of Bunkton from the St. John Free Public Library's collection. We still don't know much about these, but if you can help with more info, we definitely be appreciative. This one is, we're looking at Victoria Street looking west. This whole series of photos, the little series we'll be looking at here from this Free Public Library, were all taken by C.E. Northrup, likely between 1886 and 1900. Here's Alma Street looking north from Queen Street. You can see a blurred man on the left, and they've got, I think, dirt sidewalks and some lovely houses with great, well-kept fences. And dating the photos in this little batch of material was aided by the appearance of a few electric lights visible in some shots. The Moncton newspapers reported the individual locations of the few exterior lights that were being installed in the later 1880s because it was quite a big deal. This is Highfield Street looking north, showing G.R. Sangster's residence, presumably that big one at the right, the kind of squarish one in the foreground. And there's a dog sniffing at something on the far left, I think. Further down the street, this is a detail from the same shot showing a church further down, maybe on Highfield Street. I'm not sure what church this would be, but I'd like to know. This shot shows, this is a great one. It shows Main Street from the front of Church Street looking west. And you can see a lot of great details. Oh, this is about where it is today, the same view here. If we switch back and forth, Church Street being just at the right and looking down the same direction. It's pretty much unrecognizable. I don't think any of these buildings are the same. And if we're looking at details of the same one, you can see first the nice wooden sidewalks with heavy planking. There's a watch and jewelry repair shop at the immediate left there with a watch hanging out. There's a street sign in the distance reading Westmoreland Street on the left-hand side, where I've put another little red line above the NY on that lighter colored building. And that's where Westmoreland intersects Main Street, which it still does today, obviously. On the far right of this photo, there's detail. I'm showing a detail of this handsome brick building at the shop of, I think, J.H. Nickerson, vendor of watches, silverware, spectacles, and diamonds, just the essentials. From the same Northrop series, this is Main Street looking west from First Crossing. So I'm not sure if that's the railway crossing or this is showing a business, I think. It just has the sign Brunswick on it. So I'm assuming Brunswick House or Brunswick Hotel, probably. Quite fancy. And this gent is hanging out outside the hotel near a rocking chair. This was labeled as Victoria School, showing the school sometime after the third floor was added, so after 1890. If anyone knows where this building is or was, I'd certainly like to know. It's new to us, like I said, and we haven't done much research on it. There was a note that said something about Main Street, but could that be true? I don't know. I'd like to know. So many of these next photos come from a superb collection of newspaper photographs. These are negatives created by Times and Transcript news photographers from the mid-1950s onwards. We're very fortunate in that we have multiple, like a number of old newspaper photographer collections for Moncton. For some other cities, we don't have any at all. In this case, we'll be looking at the 50s and 60s ones mostly for this little bit, but we also in the last year or two received a series of negatives that were owned by the Robb family, R-O-B-B, and they are later 1940s Moncton newspaper photos. So we have about 1,000 of those as well. This one shows a very recognizable scene, the underpass or so-called subway at Moncton on Main Street. This is a detail of the same image. It won't surprise many of you to learn that not everything gets better with time. And photography is one of those things that you can't say just continually got better. This is another detail from the same shot showing Clogg's Diamonds and other businesses. So about photography and whether it got better or worse, it certainly got easier to do, but the quality generally declined for commercial photography from the 19th century. And specifically what I mean is the resolution of old photographs is stunning. The majority of 19th century photography is much higher quality than the majority of photography taken today even. The glass negatives that were used in the 19th century are incredibly high resolution. The large format plastic negatives that were used by commercial photographers like these newspapermen in the, especially the first half, almost 3/4 in some cases, of the 20th century were extremely high quality too, and a lot of them are much nicer, sharper looking photos than the vast majority of digital photos people are taking today, unless they're professional photographers, generally speaking. So this is a shot from July of 1958 showing the construction of a bridge on the Trans-Canada Highway. Do any of you recognize where this is? As you can imagine, we have many poorly identified newspaper photographs in particular. Just have a quick note that were jotted down by the journalist or photographer. And the community, talking to folks like yourselves, often help us greatly to add additional information. This is a November 1958 newspaper photo. And as I was saying, there are a lot that can only be properly identified if one goes back into the old papers and tries to match news items with images. In most cases, we haven't had time to do this for entire collections, which may consist of tens of thousands of images. Here, for instance, we know that the famed New Brunswick boxer Yvonne Durrell is receiving a plaque for something, and we know when, but we don't know why or what for. This is a nice shot of 18th of March, 1959. Moncton firefighters giving a tour to children, showing them around some of the equipment. There's an awful lot of firefighters. I had to cut down on it, but there's some great shots. This is April of 1959, showing a house burning in Moncton. We don't know which one or where, as usual. Newspaper photos give a somewhat skewed view of the world if you're digging through them. There's lots of fires, crashes, and disasters. But it wasn't really all that bad. It was just the sensational stuff they were going for in the daily newspapers. This is a detail of the same photo showing the Moncton Fire Department's hook and ladder company number 2 truck. Some boots laying down there. Great shot of City Hall in June 1959 in Moncton. And some details of the same at the right-hand side of City Hall showing Robin Hood Flour, a business that I can't read the proprietor's name, and a typewriter business at the far right of City Hall. Another great shot, Yvonne Durrell training hard. He was a media darling in the late 1950s, I guess, in Moncton, and passing on what he's learned to his son in another newspaper story from the same year. This is November of 1959. It was just a little story about slippery roads, I think. It's showing what I believe to be the Gunningsville Bridge looking towards Riverview, a great shot. All the billboards in the marshy area there. This is another super shot from December 18th, 1959, just showing Main Street in Moncton. You got Zellers and Woolworth on the right-hand side and a lot of other businesses. Neil McKay, jeweler on the left, a barber shop. Santa Claus and Coca-Cola, clogs, diamonds again, and a lot of other nice details. You can zoom in and see Zellers and Woolworth with their Christmas displays. This is December 1960, looking towards downtown. It's just described in the newspaper photographer's notes only as proposed causeway site. So there you go. This is from July 10th, 1961. In the world of weekly papers, lots of prosaic aspects of everyday life were documented too, as well as the sensational disaster stuff. This shows Mittens Dairy in Riverview. And in June 1970, this is the corner of Champlain Ave and Acadie Ave. Later, it was the location of Ultramar and Jean Coutu. It's a great shot of Hashi's Auto Service, Esso Service. This is from the 15th of September, 1961. And by the 1960s, there was much debate about whether or not Canada should have a new unique national flag. Thousands of potential flags were proposed from people across the country. This one, apparently by 2 Moncton residents, was proposed as well. Not bad. 4 years later, by the 15th of February, 1965, we had our new flag. Another great Moncton Fire Department PR shot with the men checking out their new extinguisher. All right, boys, just act natural. 23 September 1961, Salvation Army Band blasts away, perhaps on Main Street, I think. The distinctive bonnets and uniforms make them easy to pick out in a crowd in these old photos. This is from a little series in the newspaper of girl guides watching cookies being packed at Marvin's Biscuits and cranking out girl guide cookies at Marvin's in April of 1963. Little detail of that. This is from 1965, the 75th anniversary of the city of Moncton. This is the mayor of Medicine Hat in a hat participating in a fishing contest with Moncton's mayor. It all took place on an Irving-owned tug or barge in the river. The shorts, cowboy hat, and rain slicker. It's a unique ensemble. They capped off the 75th celebrations with a street dance near the Eatons, where Moncton's teens partied with reckless abandon, I assume. This is from September of 1962, September 22nd. This is one of my favorite Moncton photos from this period. It's a great slice of life shot. It's a fireman's parade and to celebrate the opening of their new station. Confusingly, O'Brien's Takeout on the far back on the right-hand side is offering Mexican fare, right next to the Eastern Dry Cleaners, it's called. There's kids from the same shot giving it their all, baton twirlers, and whistling while they work their way up the street. Another great shot downtown in the mid-1960s. This one folks might have seen before. Woolworths, again, Zellers, McKay, during the day this time. And a different angle from the top of the subway or underpass. There's a grill back there I can just barely make out. It's got a pretty cool sign. This is the 6 October 1966 newspaper shot, building of the celebrated or maligned Riverview Causeway, just starting to dump in the fill. Parley Beach in the late 1960s, as crowded as ever. And some of you folks might remember this from CBC a few years ago. Pre-Causeway, the title board turned Moncton into the province's surfing capital, at least for these adventurous Americans, in late August 1967. And they made a film of their trip that I haven't seen, but that'd be quite cool. Moncton was also full of cool kids, not just the surfers. This 22 July 1970 shot shows it was labeled City Hall Rock Festival Demonstration, Strawberry Fields protesters. Historian Greg Marquis described Strawberry Fields. So let me just back that up. Sorry, I meant to say Strawberry Fields, long story short, was a planned rock and roll festival that was supposed to take place not far from Moncton, but it was canceled. So, and these young people in Moncton are protesting to try and stop the festival from being canceled. Historian Greg Marquis described the festival as a multi-day outdoor music festival that would include some of the top acts of the era, including Mountain, Grand Funk Railroad, Eric Burdon, War, Sly and the Family Stone, and even Led Zeppelin. Marquis wrote, posters promised 3 days of love, sun, and sound in free North America, Canada. Initially, they were denied permission to stage the International Carnival in Ontario, so the promoters next tried to entice hip youth to get high on Sky and Sun on a 100-acre farm at Barachois near Shediac. But civic officials opposed the festival and it never happened, long story short. And these people were all very bummed out, I imagine. This is an aerial view of the Moncton CNR yards. And some of you folks might be familiar with the book McMillans New Brunswick by Dan Sukup. This book is about a series of amazing early 1930s aerial photographs taken of Moncton and surrounding areas on glass plate negatives. We have this collection at the archives. This one shows the Reed Company Limited. About this collection, Richard McCulley was born in Nova Scotia and worked as a pilot with Canadian International Airways. He started a flying school in Moncton and a short-lived airline in the city as well. David Reed and his son Harold Reed of Reed Studio at the corner of Lutz and Main took the photos, and McCulley or Marty Fraser were pilots who flew in one of the McCulley's planes, which had been fitted with a glass nose for the purpose of photography. These are among the very earliest and most important aerial photographs of New Brunswick in existence. And lots of them show Moncton and surrounding areas. This is a Catholic church in Shediac, the Enterprise Foundry in Sackville, Bourview Cabins, a roadside stop at Moncton with the old gas pumps visible. This is a busy day at Shediac Beach, possibly Parley Beach. Aerial views like this one show ruins of old construction and infrastructure projects that likely are no longer visible today. In this case, the long diagonal cut of trees through this photo shows the route of the incredible but failed engineering project of the Chignekto ship railway. Fredericton engineer H.G.C. Ketchum envisioned ships crossing the isthmus from the Bay of Fundy to the Northumberland Strait at Baie Verte. But instead of building a canal, his idea was to build the first ship railway in the world. As Dan Soukup wrote, it would hoist fully loaded vessels by means of a hydraulic lift onto double rail tracks, where 2 trains would pull the ship the 27 kilometers to the other shore. Merchants of St. John would benefit most from such a shortcut, which promised to save up to 800 kilometers between Montreal, St. John, and Boston. Continuing Soukup's description of the fate of that ship railway, when financing broke down after 3 years of construction, the project was abandoned. The wooden structures which had been laid were uprooted and used in nearby farms, and much of the heavy rock was used to maintain the intercolonial railway and later to build the ferry terminal at Cape Tormentine, which was completed in 1917. So you can see the remains of the breakwater in the foreground there that went right out into the bay. We actually have another fascinating series of glass negatives from 1890s taken by Fredericton photographer George D. Taylor, showing the construction of that ship railway that we just saw from the air, the ruins of it. Here is the breakwater forming a lagoon at one end of the railway, maybe the one we'd just seen from the air. Speaking of George Taylor, if you're interested in very old New Brunswick photographs, a few years ago, Ron Reese and I co-wrote a little coffee table book on the photographs of George. It's called Slow Seconds. Here's another shot of George's of them cutting in and building the ship railway, which never happened. And another one showing the extent of the construction work. And note the steam shovel and horse working side by side. So anyway, I've gotten us quite far away from Moncton, and I think I've gone over time, so I'll stop there. But thanks very much for having me, and Joanna can let you know how to get in touch if you'd like to chat about some of the photographs or ask any questions at all. Thanks very much.